Well, good evening, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, wherever you're at. I'm in Bangladesh myself. It's funny how today we live in such a connected world on the internet. I think some of us forget that. I think our politicians forget that. We're all connected a lot closer than we think. So I'd like to give you a little presentation on cordyceps tonight. Cordyceps is one of my fascinations. It's one of the most interesting of the medicinal mushrooms, I think. So I have a PowerPoint presentation I have put together here. Let's see if I can bring that up. I hope everyone can see this. My name's John Holliday. I have had the good fortune for many years to work with Phil Cleaver, who's even been doing this longer than myself. Phil's probably one of the absolute best mushroom growers in the world. Between the two of us, we have almost 100 years experience in this. Man, I never thought I'd be saying that, but I've been doing it since about 1976. So this is a picture of me in a tent in Tibet, in the Himalayas, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. Talking about mushroom quality. What is it? What does it mean? Where do the medicinal mushrooms come from? How are they grown? How do we compare it with other mushrooms? You know, since this COVID pandemic started, the interest in and the demand for medicinal mushrooms and other herbs and all sorts of supplements has just skyrocketed. I get questions every day, or at least 3-4 times a week, from all over the world, people that want to know about medicinal mushrooms. You know, what makes our cultivated mushrooms better? Do they compare with wild mushrooms? Things like that. Mushrooms, a lot of people don't, realize it, but mushrooms are probably one of the main sources of all pharmaceutical drugs today. All of our antibiotics, anti-rejection drugs, most of our antiviral drugs, most of our anti-cancer drugs, all of the anti-cholesterol drugs, they all come from mushrooms. Mushrooms have some pretty unique chemistry, some pretty fascinating and complex chemistry. You see, the function of plants in nature are the molecular assemblers. They take simple things like water and oxygen and CO2, and they assemble it into these complex organic molecules like proteins and cellulose and pine trees. And the function of mushrooms and the different fungi in nature, those are the molecular disassemblers. They take these complex organic molecules like proteins and cellulose and pine trees, and they disassemble it back down to that original water and oxygen and CO2. And it takes some very complex chemistry to do this. If you think about a redwood tree, let's say, it'll stand there in the sun and the rain for 3,000 years. Very, very stable compounds. You won't find any plastic that's going to lay in the sun for 3,000 years, And yet, when that redwood tree dies, in just a matter of a few months, the mushrooms will disassemble it back down to water and oxygen and CO2. And in order to do this, requires some very big, complex molecules. And most of these big, complex organic molecules, well, first off, they're things that we don't know how to synthesize in a test tube. We can't make these synthetically. That tree outside the window makes things every day that we can't imagine making in a test tube. So if we want these complex compounds, we have to go back to nature. And these complex organic compounds have many different health benefits in humans. So what I've heard a lot over the last couple of years, a lot of the newer companies that want to get into growing medicinal mushrooms and supplying medicinal mushrooms in the market, oh, a lot of them will tell you, oh, it's not possible to grow cordyceps. Cordyceps is this strange mushroom that grows out of the head of a caterpillar above 14,000 feet in elevation in the Himalayas. It's one of the most amazing medicinal compounds that we know of on the planet. It's also the most expensive medicinal raw material of anything on the planet. Wild collected cordyceps, top quality, is ridiculously expensive. It's $250,000 a kilo. So here's a picture of a cordyceps that I took at about, I don't know, I think this was about 21,000 feet elevation. Oh, in metric, that's something like 5,500 meters elevation in Tibet. And this small brown mushroom sticks up out of the ground, and when we dig it up, you can see it's attached to the head of a caterpillar. Pretty amazing. Some of the things that nature gives us is almost unbelievable. So what is it? Well, it's a mushroom that grows out of the head of a caterpillar. It's been used for a long time in medicine. I think the first really well-documented reference in the literature was from about 1450. So it's been known for a long time. Let's see. So in 2006, I took probably the first Western scientific expedition into the Himalayas to see if we could find this medicinal mushroom and bring back some samples and see if we could find a way to cultivate it in controlled conditions. We went to Tibet. This is a yak. A yak is one of our ancestral cows. You know, back in the last ice age, there were a lot of large woolly mammals. Woolly mammals and woolly mammoths and woolly rhinos, and well, this was a woolly cow. And the top of the Himalayas is one of the last places where that ice age climate still exists. And so this yak here is the ancestor of all of our modern cows. That's where they're wild, is in Tibet. These are the mountains we went into to find the cordyceps. Doesn't look like somewhere where you'd really go looking for mushrooms, but this is the only place that Cordyceps sinensis grows. It's found only above 14,000 meters in elevation. And we worked with the nomad people there. This tent is where they live. The tent is woven out of yak hair. And I wanted to show some of the photos of the people that we were working with and the location. This is inside of one of the tents. The wife there is cooking us lunch. That's a cheese made from yak milk. In the background there, that pile you see, that's yak dung, which is what they burn for fuel. Since there's no trees, there's no shrubs, there's no other firewood. And the air is so thin, you really can't start a fire very easily there. When we try to start a fire, you blow into it to get it going, but there's not enough air to blow the fire to life there. So on top of the yak dung, you see a little hand cranked blower. You have to use those to get the fire going. And this was her mother with a butter churn. She came by to get the butter churn and to meet the foreigners while we were there. The people there are related to the Native American people. You'll see this lady, her features almost looked like a Navajo Indian. People from this part of Asia were the first ones to cross the land bridge and settle the New World, settled into Canada and US and South America. Had a beautiful young daughter there. We had brought some milk with us. So this is the countryside. A couple of wild yaks there. I'm going to go back to yak several times, because this is how we found the cordyceps, by watching the yaks. The yaks kind of act as a compass to find the cordyceps. They feed on the cordyceps at the certain season of the year. The cordyceps only comes out for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year, late May and early June. But we would see where the yaks were grazing, and we'd go shoo off the yaks, which are pretty big and scary. These are well over 2 meters tall at the shoulder. They're very big animals, but fortunately they're not aggressive. And we worked with this family. This family made their annual income in that 2 or 3 week period just collecting cordyceps for the market. In fact, about 80% of the entire economy of Tibet revolves around this 2 or 3 week collection period. And they had been doing it for quite some time. This was his son, and he's digging up a cordyceps here. You can barely see it. If I zoomed in, there's actually a small cordyceps there. Very, very difficult to see. They're only about 2.5 centimeters out of the ground, I guess. Blend in pretty well. It's one of the reasons that they're so rare and so costly. You can see the size of it here. And this was the first one her husband had found that year. Basically for them, it's like picking up $100 bill, because that's about what that cordyceps is worth. On a good day, they may find 15 or 20 cordyceps, but that's how rare they are. So regardless of how effective they are, it wouldn't be practical really to put it into world trade for a dietary supplement, because there's just not enough of them. The total world collection of wild cordyceps is around 60 tons per year, whereas at Aloha Medicinals we produce that much in a month. So we've been able to cultivate it and make it available for people at a reasonable cost. Once the cordyceps are collected by the nomads, they'll go into the city where buyers like this guy will purchase them. And then from there, they go to markets all over the world. This is in a town called Ningchi, where they spread their cordyceps out on the street, and buyers from all over the world come there and pick them out. There's probably $1 million worth of cordyceps sitting there on the street there. So what we did, we went up and we collected specimens right in the field. We documented everything real well and recorded it. And we took samples right directly into sterile containers. You can see some barcodes there. We did it really properly. We collected a couple of hundred specimens during this expedition. And we actually set up our own little kind of lab operation right in the field. This is literally just a couple of pieces of plexiglass and some duct tape. And we took our test tubes and our scalpels, and we did our initial lab work right there in the field to try and get these cordyceps into cultivation. At this point, no one had ever really been able to cultivate cordyceps. Once we got back to the city called Lhasa, we set up our little lab in a hotel room, and we started our work there. And once we got those samples back to our operation in California and in Nevada, we started generating cultures out of those. We took sections of the cordyceps, we transferred it in sterile conditions into petri dishes, and we were able to generate genetically pure cultures of cordyceps. Looks simple when you see a picture, but this requires some pretty advanced techniques. Ultimately, though, we were able to come up with the genetically pure cordyceps, the real deal, right from the Himalayas, but with no insect. In nature, it only grows on insects, but The way we do it is a completely vegetarian base. We grow it on grain. So this is the production process itself. This big submarine looking thing, it's called an autoclave. And this is a large steam chamber where we sterilize material. We start out with these tubs of grain. We use white sorghum grain to grow it on organic white sorghum as our substrate base. We'll add a few amendments to that to adjust the nutrient profile so that we're able to grow it essentially the same as what it grows in nature, but without the insects. And we grow it in these special grow bags that hold 5 kilos of material each. These are a special heat-resistant food-grade plastic bag with a microporous filter that allows the exchange of oxygen and CO2, but while keeping out all other microorganisms. So this is really it's a monoculture. This is called sterile substrate fermentation. If we think about a normal fermentation process, it's done in liquid. I mean, if you think about making wine, for example, we take a substrate. In the case of wine, it's fruit juice, and we'll sterilize it by heating. Then we'll introduce our target organism, which in the case of wine is a yeast called Saccharomyces. And then over the next few weeks, as that yeast bioconverts the substrate into fungal tissue, it is excreting into the environment biologically active compounds. In the case of wine, these are things like colors and flavors and alcohol. Well, the same thing happens in a solid substrate, such as when we're using grain to grow it. And as the cordyceps is growing and it's bioconverting that grain into fungal tissue, into cordyceps tissue, it is excreting into that grain all of these biologically active compounds, things like immune compounds, immune stimulants, antibiotic compounds that are effective against different bacterias, antifungal compounds, antiviral compounds, compounds which are effective in cancer treatment. Many different biological activities are being produced in this bag as it grows. So once that bag is sterilized, we'll inoculate it with our target organism. In this case, it's cordyceps, and we will heat seal that bag. The white strips you see there are a special microporous filter that allows gas exchange, but while keeping everything else out of the bag. And then we'll grow that for a period of weeks, and that bag becomes a microclimate where it maintains the correct gas exchange, humidity, and it maintains the sterility. The picture here, these bags are almost ready to harvest. At this point, what we have is a 5-kilo block of cordyceps. Even though that wild cordyceps may only weigh a half a gram, we can grow it by the ton once we have isolated that genetically pure culture. And so we grow it under the same conditions that nature does. I'd like to say that I invented this, but actually nature invented it. It grows at such a high elevation that it's a special low oxygen, low temperature environment that it grows in. And we replicate that condition in order to grow cordyceps, which is equivalent, bioidentical to the wild collected cordyceps. Actually, we were issued a couple of patents on this process. We came up with some methods because we have such an absolutely controlled environment where we're controlling every parameter: temperature, moisture, light cycle, humidity, even play music to it, you know. Since we're able to maintain perfect cultivation parameters, we're able to produce cordyceps under cultivation, which is considerably more potent than the wild collected cordyceps. This is a chemical analysis, an analytical signature of the wild collected cordyceps. And I've labeled some of the active ingredients here. Mostly what I labeled here are antiviral compounds. And when you look at what we grow in the lab, it's the same thing, but it has higher concentrations of those active ingredients. So the cordyceps that Purica is using is quite a bit more potent, about 5 times more potent than the best wild collected cordyceps you can buy. It's bioidentical. It's the same thing, it's just more potent. So traditionally, this has been used a long time in Chinese medicine and in Tibetan medicine, and there are certain characteristics that have been noted that this is used for. It's used widely for treating all sorts of kidney and lung diseases, treating viral infections, lowering blood pressure. It's considered a tonic food, basically to strengthen the body, especially used after an illness results in the patient recovering their prior state after a prolonged illness, and well known to increase libido in men and women, and also physical performance. It's widely used by professional athletes, mountain climbers, football players, bicycle racers, boxers, all kinds of things. It increases the oxygen absorption in the blood by quite a bit, about 40% increase in oxygen. And I think the reason for that is because it grows in the body of these moths at such a high elevation. And moths aren't very good flyers, And so when a moth is trying to escape from the birds, the cordyceps in its body releases this burst of oxygen to give the moth an advantage, get away from the bird. In our modern medical uses, we've proven many different compounds. Anti-tumor, cordyceps is used in quite a few anti-cancer medications around the world. And immune modulation. Immune modulation, the term modulation refers to a bidirectional effect. You see, in the body, we have many types of immune cells, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. We have pro-inflammatory cells and we have anti-inflammatory cells. And proper immune function is a balance of these pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cells. And something that cordyceps does is it balances these different cell types for a correct immune response. So if we give it to a patient with an autoimmune disease, it tends to reduce that overactive immune function. If we give it to the same compounds to a patient in an immune deficient state, like leukemia, lupus, lymphomas, different cancers, it will increase the immune function. That's why it's called immune modulation. It's not really an immune stimulant or an immune depressant, but it works in both directions. Also lowers cholesterol pretty significantly. It balances the high-density lipoproteins to the low-density lipoproteins. The HDL is the healthy cholesterol, and the LDL is the unhealthy one. Tends to balance that. Anti-inflammatory, very good for conditions like chronic bronchitis, arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and osteoarthritis. And very well-known antiviral activity. Cordyceps is used in the production of some of the HIV drugs which are used in Africa today. I'm asked every day, is it effective for COVID? Well, I don't know. We haven't ever done the research exactly on COVID or directly on COVID, but I have every reason to think that it would be, because it's antiviral against so many other classes of virus that it's probably, quite beneficial in boosting the body's resistance to all the viruses. And especially in immune modulation. So when we look at the big 5 killers in North America, this is the top 5 causes of death. The statistics are a couple of years old. It was the latest statistics I could get my hands on that were accurate, but I think that probably even today, this is the top 5: heart disease, cancer, stroke, respiratory disease, diabetes. It's what I call immunological scurvy. Traditional scurvy is a disease not seen so much anymore. It was quite prevalent in the days of the sailing ships, when people would go for long periods of time with no fruit and vegetables. And basically, scurvy is a lack of vitamin C. Vitamin C is one of those compounds which the human body must have. It is absolutely required. And yet the human body does not produce its own vitamin C. It has to come in through the mouth. And if you withhold vitamin C from a patient long enough, that patient will die in every case. And yet we can take a severe scurvy patient who is literally, on death's doorstep, and we can treat them with something as simple as lemon juice, and they will start to recover almost immediately, because it's that vitamin C that they're lacking. So immunological scurvy is the same thing. It's a lack of some compounds that the body must have to trigger immune function that's not made by the body, must come in through the mouth. And so let's ask the question, in these big 5: heart disease, stroke, cancer, respiratory disease, diabetes, what aspect does the immune function play in these diseases? Are these immune dysfunction diseases? I think it's safe to say that most diseases are at least mediated by the immune system. The immune system is that part of our system that stands between our bodies and a hostile outside environment. This is what keeps us healthy. And a proper immune function really comes down to this molecule. This is a molecule that's found in the bloodstream. It is required to activate immune function. I'm going to show you how that works. And it's a 2-part molecule, like a tadpole, with a head and a tail. It has a protein head which is made by the body, but this polysaccharide tail is a very unique structure. It's a triple right-hand helix of a particular type of polysaccharide, and it's not made by the body. It has to come in with our diet. And because of some changes, primarily in our agricultural system, changes in our diet, this polysaccharide portion is drastically deficient in Western societies. It's required to activate immune function, and yet it is deficient in most of our diets. And when this part of the molecule is deficient, it leads to such things as cancer and rampant viral infections and all of these things that we see today, which we consider diseases of developed countries. So how does it work? Well, we have about 260 different types of immune cells which have been identified so far. Things like T cells and B cells and natural killer cells and dendritic cells and all kinds of different names, probably even more. But we've identified about 260 different types, and they each have their own specific function. And these different types of immune cells circulate in the deactivated state, kind of on guard, but turned off. obviously these immune cells are turned off, or we would dissolve ourselves from the inside out. But when they are presented with an immune challenge, such as if they encounter a virus, bacteria, aberrant cell, like a cancer cell, when they encounter one of these immune challenges, this two-part protein-bound polysaccharide molecule attaches to receptors on the surface of the immune cell and turns it on. Some of these cells are called Dectin-2 receptors and CR3 receptors and HBS receptors. But the key here is that this polysaccharide portion of the molecule is chronically deficient in our Western societies. But when that protein-bound polysaccharide binds to the receptor, what it does is it turns that immune cell on. It activates it to perform whatever function that cell is programmed to do, whether that cell is programmed to destroy the virus, to counter the bacteria, to address that cancer cell, whatever that cell type might be programmed to do. This protein-bound polysaccharide molecule is the trigger that's required for us to have appropriate immune response. So that leads us to today's supplements. The world has come a long ways in dietary supplements now. Started out with our lettered vitamins 30 years ago, vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C. And over time, we've learned more about different herbs, minerals, mushrooms that give us condition-specific supplements. Supplements which are formulated to address these particular type of immune dysfunctions that we encounter every day. This is what I take myself every day. I take 6 of these a day. And I haven't been sick in a long time. I'm 65 now. I'm doing pretty well, I think. So Complete 360 from Purica, one of the ingredients is Cordyceps. To me, Cordyceps is one of the key ingredients here. This one has multiple different mushrooms and ashwagandha, and all of these different mushrooms have these polysaccharides in a slightly different form. So these different mushrooms, like the sun mushroom, reishi, maitake, lion's mane, chaga, shiitake, cordyceps, coriolis, these all activate those different classes of immune cells. There's no one thing that addresses all of our immune function, but by putting this more complex formula together, we're able to get a broader spectrum of immune response. I like to look at it like it's easier to hit the target with a shotgun than it is with a laser beam. This is another one which has cordyceps in it. It's another very good product. And this one is more specifically directed toward virus, antiviral support. I have an office in Ghana, and HIV is very prevalent in that country in West Africa. And so this is what all of my staff takes in the Ghana office. This one also has the sun mushroom, cordyceps, maitake, shiitake, coriolis, and the reishi, as well as EGCG, which is from green tea and grapes, some other things. Good product. And also direct bioidentical cordyceps is just pure cordyceps. And this one is primarily used by people who are looking for more energy. I mentioned professional athletes. This is very common in all of the professional athletes. The Olympic Committee about 20 years ago declared that cordyceps is not doping. So this is allowed for all performance sports, Olympics, everything like that. And it really does result in big time energy support. Most of our energy supplements are things like caffeine and ephedrine and amphetamine and things that trick the brain into thinking that we have more energy, but we really don't, right? Cordyceps, on the other hand, actually increases the body's concentration of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's the actual energy molecule in the body that gives us energy, you know? So you may take cordyceps and not necessarily feel like you have more energy. You're not going to get jittery like drinking coffee. You just don't run out of energy. You're like the Energizer bunny, you know? You find that you go through the whole day, and at the end of the day, you still have energy to do something in the evening, which is a big deal in our world. So this, I think, was one of my biggest additions to the science, you know, is actually growing the cordyceps the same way that nature does. It's nice to think that we could just grow it at, you know, room temperature at sea level. But when we do it that way, it's not the same, you know, it's a different character. Nature evolved it at a high elevation. So that's how we grow it. I reproduced that slide apparently. I wanted to show you some, what I think are cool pictures. When we started this research back 20 years ago, Cordyceps sinensis was the only cordyceps that was known really to be used in medicine, that and one other species. But in the process of doing this research, we found that there are many types of cordyceps. This is where our research is taking us today, you know, going forward. Cordyceps, it turns out, is found in all insects. You'll see a lot of false information on the internet saying that Cordyceps is a parasite that kills the insect. That's just not correct. You know, it's very easy for us to see a insect that has a mushroom growing out of it and make the assumption that the mushroom killed the insect. But actually, in the healthy insect, the cordyceps act like the blood cell of the insect. For example, insects are virtually immune to all known virus infections. And the reason is because the cordyceps in the body of the insect protects that insect against those threats that it finds in its environment. You think about cockroaches, for example. Where a cockroach lives and what a cockroach eats, and yet cockroaches are completely immune to all of our known diseases. They shouldn't be, you know, they should be, they should get viral infections like any other living organism, but they don't because they have cordyceps in the body, and it's a symbiotic relationship where both parties benefit. And the way the insect benefits is because the cordyceps in the body protects that insect against the threats that it sees in its environment. Here's one growing on a grasshopper. My friend Daniel Winkler found this one in Bolivia. Pretty neat picture. This is the only other type of cordyceps which was used in medicine. This is very closely related to the one from Himalayas, but it grows at sea level in New Zealand. And this is the one that was used to do the Maori tattooing. They would take this cordyceps and burn it to an ash, mix it with oil or water, and use that as the tattoo ink. One thing about using that as a tattoo ink is the tattoos didn't get infected. Here's one growing on, I don't know what it is, some kind of a fly. This one was from Peru. Here's one that is in the rainforest in Brazil, grows on ants. This one is found in California and grows on spiders. Here's one on a tarantula. Pretty amazing. Here's several of the different ones that we've found. So even though the mushrooms are very tiny in nature, once we're able to take that genetically pure culture, we can produce it by the ton. We found quite a few different species in Peru. Seems like these are mostly found in the mountains. There's one on a wasp. This one is very commonly grown today. This is one which did not have a traditional use in medicine, but we found that the properties of this are almost identical to the one from the Himalayas. This one is easier to cultivate. It's at large scale, has the same properties as the Cordyceps sinensis. So going forward, we're going to see more and more Cordyceps militaris in dietary supplements. So Purica makes good stuff. I've been supplying mushrooms to Purica for a lot of years. They micronize full spectrum mushrooms. That means it's every part of the fungal life cycle, the mushroom life cycle. This picture of reishi here on the right. That's another very well-known medicinal mushroom that has strong immune properties. Purica actually has a whole range of what I consider mushroom superstars. Chaga is from Siberia primarily. It's a great immune supplement. The pure Cordyceps. Lion's mane has very unique nerve growth factors. Lion's mane triggers the growth of brain and spinal cord and peripheral nerve tissue. I had some back surgery a couple years back, and they managed to cut the spinal cord, screwed up, left me paralyzed on the left side. And I got on the lion's mane, stayed on it, and within about 3 months or so, 4 months, I was walking. And it's been about 3 years now, and I get around pretty well. I'm no longer paralyzed, so lion's mane's good stuff. I mentioned the complete 360. It's what I take every day now. They have it both in powders and in capsules. Reishi is probably one of the most well-studied of the medicinal mushrooms. It's used a lot in anti-cancer products, turkey tails, cordyceps, Immune 7. Also, I like this. Purica makes some combinations of mushrooms and cocoa. Makes a great drink. I cheat. I mix it with coffee because I like coffee, but even just by itself, it's pretty good. There's ones for calming you, clearing your mind, chilled vibe. That one just sort of relaxes you, I think. Just to take away the stress, you know. So these are some that I really recommend you might want to try. I like these products. People are so much more aware of their health these days. I think many of us are discouraged with today's health system, between costs and the delays in trying to get doctor's appointments, and some of the drugs which have more side effects than they do main effects. So people have a tendency today to take more of their health decisions into their own hands. I think it's really true that it's easier to avoid a problem than it is to come back later and try and solve it. Once you're sick, it can be an uphill battle to try and regain your health. But by taking some of these supplements daily, I think it gives us a better chance at maintaining our good health in the beginning. So you can get more information on their mushroom products at purica.com. These are pictures of some different medicinal mushrooms. I always liked this picture, so I like to put it in my presentations. Dr. John's predictions for the future. We're seeing more and more doctors that are taking the same approach, practicing preventative medicine rather than waiting until something happens and then trying to correct the problem. And it seems every year the doctors are more and more getting away from that synthetic chemistry dogma that they were taught in medical school, and realizing that things like diet I mean, look how important diet is. I'm old enough that I grew up in a time when people didn't even think about diet. They waited until you were sick and then they prescribed drugs. But we know today that if we reduce things like our sugar intake and our red meat and, just eat a good, healthy diet, we have a better chance of maintaining our health. And the physicians have come around to that now, too. I think nobody's more discouraged with modern medicine than the guys that are practicing on a daily basis. And that what we're seeing today and going forward is that immune enhancement is really the breakthrough, by enhancing our natural immune function. That's basically the next penicillin. The same way that antibiotics changed the medical landscape 100 years ago. So I'm ready to take questions, because I'm sure everybody's got lots of questions.
Hello.
Hi, Brenda. Did we get some questions from the audience?
There is a few questions for you. So I'm Brenda with Purica, and so nice to have you here, John. Thank you for being here. So there is a couple. The first one is there a mushroom that treats Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, lion's mane. Lion's mane, a combination of lion's mane and reishi. We have seen some really good results with Parkinson's and several other nerve degeneration disorders. Of course, nothing works for everybody, but it's certainly worth a try. There's no downside to it. It's not toxic or anything. There's no side effects.
And you refer to your own nerve growth, your healing journey. That's great. Yeah. The other one is for treating severe eczema or psoriasis. Would mushrooms be effective in that area?
Good question. I don't know, honestly. I think the answer is probably yes, but it's not something I've really looked at.
Okay. So moving on, we've got there's two questions around the same area. So do cordyceps increase white blood cell count? And then in combination with that, do they also support red blood cell count? Because there's someone here their body destroys their red blood cells.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'd love to address that because, as I mentioned, there's a bunch of different types of blood cells. The term white blood cell count in general refers to immune cells. Okay, so all these different types of white blood cell count, they're all immune cells. And all of our immune cells come from the same place. They're produced in the bone marrow, in the long bones, in the legs primarily. And they leave the bone marrow as immature cells, and they travel to different organs in the body where they mature into specific types of cells. T cells, natural killer cells, things like that. And one of the things that cordyceps does is it works at that differentiation phase. In other words, where those immature cells are directed for maturation. So if we give it to someone with a low white blood cell count, the white blood cell count increases. If we give it to someone with an autoimmune condition that has a high white blood cell count, then the white blood cell count comes down. So when it comes to both red cells and white cells, it does a kind of a balancing act, and it brings things more back into that normal, healthy range.
That's beautiful. So the big question was, again, and that already came through about the treating COVID. Of course, that's going to be one of the questions that's going to come forward, right? But just the ability to fight virus is important.
Yeah. It's not really allowed to discuss specific diseases. So I'm not supposed to say that, yes, we treat COVID with it.
Yes.
So a good question is, what do you take, John? Yeah.
Would you take? Exactly.
Yeah, I take Cordyceps because Cordyceps has very well-known and well-understood antiviral properties. We have done extensive research on a couple of different viruses, the hepatitis B virus and also HIV virus. We haven't done that research on COVID virus directly, but just the same way that an antibiotic is going to be effective against a whole range of bacteria, I think the same thing is true with the antiviral compounds. There are a number of different classes of viruses, and they basically respond in the same way to the antiviral compounds. So is it effective against COVID virus? Most likely. I would say 98% yes, it is. I can't point to research doing that because it's fairly new disease and we haven't done that research, but I have every reason to suspect that the results would come back positive when we do the research.
Now, would you take a broad spectrum approach to that, or just Cordyceps on its own?
No, I use the 360 because I'm a firm believer that we don't know very much. I mean, the immune system is incredibly complex. Like I say, 260 different types of cells that we know of. And I was mentioning that triple right-hand helix polysaccharide portion. Well, each mushroom has a slightly different structure, which means that it attaches to different classes of cells. And the truth is, if we look at somebody in a disease state, we don't have any way to know what aspect of the immune function is a problem there. Was it a T cell issue, a B cell issue? We don't have any way to assess that. And so I figure by lifting all of those classes, we have a better chance of fighting that particular disease.
Of course.
A rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that's come forward, John, is on hyperthyroidism. Thyroidism. Thank you. Yeah, in that situation, would you recommend the Cordyceps, or is there another one that you would recommend?
No, for hyper, definitely I would recommend Cordyceps. Cordyceps seems to have pretty good effect at both hyper and hypo, and it's probably, that same balancing effect. And the other thing along with hypo and hyper is a good source of iodine. Eat lots of seafood and seaweed. Yeah.
So could you address the micronization?
Yeah.
What would you say about micronization? Does this maximize the benefits of the mushroom?
Well, there's a lot of things that you'll see on the internet that are really good scientific sounding marketing info that's not necessarily correct.
Okay.
You'll see things like a compound has to be water soluble for the body to use it. That's just crazy. I had broccoli and steak for dinner last night and it wasn't water soluble and it worked just fine, right? So there's a lot of people that question whether or not we need to make an extract of mushrooms. Let's look at where that idea came from. Reishi is one of the most well-known medicinal mushrooms, Cordyceps too, but both of these are basically like hard, woody, inedible fruit bodies. And for 5,000 years, people went out into the forest and they collected a bag of hard, woody, inedible fruit bodies. And what can you do with it when you get home? Boil it up, make a pot of tea. That's a good idea, right? But in the last 20 or 30 years, we've had a couple of real breakthrough advances in science which have changed the outlook. We have identified what those active ingredients are, and we have developed ways to cultivate the mushrooms to optimize the production of those medicinal compounds. Now, the structure of a mushroom is fibrous, and these compounds are basically locked up inside of that matrix. And the easiest way to release all of those active ingredients, not just the water-soluble ones, but everything that's present, is by micronizing it. Micronization is a size reduction. It takes it down to a particle size, which is roughly about the size of about a red blood cell, even smaller, down to about 1/5 of the size of a red blood cell. And so these compounds now become almost immediately available to the body. As soon as you swallow that capsule with a micronized product, as soon as it hits the stomach, it goes directly through the stomach lining into the blood system. Whereas if it's not a micronized product, as much as about 95% of those active ingredients will actually break down from the stomach acid in the amount of time that it takes to digest that. So micronization to me is one of the critical aspects. If you really want a good quality product, micronization is the best way to get there, because we're not separating out one class of compounds.
Right. Yeah,
Like
you're really maximizing on what's available.
Yeah. If we were to do a water extract, for example, that would certainly isolate some of the compounds, but at the expense of so many of the other active ingredients.
Yes.
So micronization is very important, yes.
Thank you for answering that, John. The other questions are, we know that they are gluten-free. Which would you say would be the best for breast cancer? There's somebody's referring to turkey tail, perhaps, and also menopause symptoms.
One at a time. Breast cancer, absolutely the complete 360, no question. We have done extensive research on that, and in fact, a very closely related product, which is used in the pharmaceutical side, is used in about 32 countries for breast cancer. So complete 360 is absolutely the best option for breast cancer. Menopause, don't know.
No?
Don't
And
get
then
old.
you touched on the high blood pressure and cholesterol with the cordyceps. You did refer to that. So would that be your recommendation for dealing with those, targeting those two conditions, high blood pressure, cholesterol?
Yeah, yes, a mixture of cordyceps and reishi works really well for blood pressure.
Okay.
The combination of the two has better effect than either one on its own.
So the other question that's coming forward is there a mushroom that could help abdominal issues such as SIBO and bloating? Oh, Sibo.
I didn't understand what FIBO.
Yeah, SIBO. So Sibo and bloating.
What's Sibo?
Sibo?
My mind is
Sibo. So I'm not exactly sure, John.
My mind is blank.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess for just dealing with the intestinal issues, right? Any kind of imbalances there.
Okay.
Infections.
Okay, that's a good question. Cordyceps. So we have about 400 different species of bacteria in the intestinal tract, or more, who knows. Some of these are beneficial, are required, for immune function and other things. Some of these can be detrimental to health. And typically in the upper 2/3 of the intestinal tract, we have classes of bacteria similar to lactobacillus. These are bacteria that utilize oxygen. And about in the lower 1/3 or so of the intestinal tract, by that point, the oxygen has been essentially depleted. And in that lower third, you have bifida bacteria. And so cordyceps has been proven in many studies to increase both bifida and lactobacillus, and at the same time to reduce the numbers of, for example, Clostridium difficile, which is another bacteria which is usually present which is detrimental to health. And so it's another balance issue. And in this case, it's a balance issue of the different bacteria in the intestinal tract. Cordyceps is actually toxic to Clostridium difficile, and it enhances the growth of the lactobacillus and the bifida. So straight cordyceps for intestinal issues.
That's beautiful.
Like Crohn's disease, things like that.
And C. diff, would that be another one with the target? C. diff. Is it C. diff? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have
C. diff is
oh, go ahead.
I was saying C. diff is the Clostridium difficile.
Oh, that is it. Okay, thank you.
C. diff, yeah.
So I think we have time for another question. Someone's saying you have a history of cold sores and subsequently developed a trigeminal nerve pain disorder. Would you recommend lion's mane?
For the nerve disorder, yes. For the cold sores, cordyceps. So lion's mane and cordyceps combo would be good for that.
Okay.
Because cordyceps is directly effective against the herpes virus. So that will reduce the cold sore outbreaks, reduce or hopefully eliminate. And the associated nerve damage that occurs, the lion's mane can help to rebuild those nerves.
Okay. Thank you.
We find that with lion's mane, up until recently, it was thought that peripheral nerves didn't regrow. Once they were damaged, they were gone forever. That's not really true. We now know that with lion's mane, peripheral nerves regrow at a rate of about 1 inch per month.
Wow.
So if we're looking at your legs, for example, legs are 3 feet long, right? Over a period of about 36 months, your body can actually replace all of the nerves in your legs. Take lion's mane.
That's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite a breakthrough. There was an interesting study that was done in China where they took some mice and they removed 6 millimeters of the spinal cord. They surgically removed a section of the spinal cord, which of course left the mouse paralyzed from there back. And then they put some sterile cotton in that space and they infused it every day with an extract from lion's mane, and the nerves regrew. After about 3 months, they would take those mice and you could put them in an aquarium full of water and you would see all 4 legs were swimming. Now, they weren't coordinated. They couldn't walk yet. But this is early days of the research. It shows us that we can actually regrow spinal cord tissue with lion's mane.
That offers a lot of hope for a lot of people. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm wondering in 20 years where that research is going to be.
Exactly. Yeah, if you think of injuries and so forth. I'm going to just do one more question, John. I think we're running out of time, so maybe we'll get one more in here. Do you recommend mushrooms for ADHD?
I don't really know what causes ADHD. I kind of suspect it might be related to diet somewhat. I don't know if mushrooms are going to help. I don't think it would hurt. But because I don't know really what the underlying cause is,
right,
it's hard to have an opinion.
Okay. You know? So I'm just going to throw this one out there. When I think of mushrooms and everything that you've had to say, I think of them as networkers. So the way you talk about them modulating, just about in every scenario, they operate like a modulator. Would you say that if you're taking mushrooms, you may not even know you have certain conditions, so they'd be very preventative in the sense that they would be targeting things that are starting to go out of balance in your system and rebalancing systems?
Yeah.
You could address all systems. I guess that's the other,
So when we look at some of the research that's been done with mushrooms and how that came about, the way that lion's mane was discovered to be nerve growth stimulants is lion's mane is very common in the Olympic Peninsula in the Pacific Northwest. And it was noted some time back that the people that lived in that area had virtually no incidence of nerve disorders. There was no Parkinson's, there was no Alzheimer's, there was no peripheral nerve disease. And some scientists went to that area back in the 80s, I guess it was, to try and see whether there was some kind of an underlying dietary issue or something. And they found that the people there had quite a high consumption of the lion's mane mushroom. And when they studied the components of the lion's mane mushroom, they found the compound which is found in fetuses and in infants that triggers the growth of the brain and the spinal cord. It's called a sphingolipid is the name. Now, why a mammalian nerve growth compound is found in mushrooms, who knows, but apparently including this as part of the diet over a long period of time basically eliminated those nerve disorders in that group of people. So yeah, I think that very much so. I think we should all include more mushrooms, eat more pizza.
Thank you so much, John. Is there more questions coming through? I'll just double check. We haven't been given the red light here yet, so.
I'm going to make another comment that nobody's asked, okay? Because I think this one is real interesting. The most widely prescribed anti-cancer drug in the world, and the number 2, and the number 3 most widely prescribed anti-cancer drugs are all from mushrooms.
Interesting, eh? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the pharmaceuticals are they using the actives for mushrooms for their?
Oh yeah. I mean, all of our cholesterol drugs come from mushrooms. People have heard of things like Lipitor and Crestor and atorvastatin and these different statin drugs. Where do they come from? Oyster mushrooms.
Interesting.
Oyster mushrooms. Yeah. And that's the only place they come from. So if anybody is on anti-cholesterol drugs, eat more oyster mushrooms because you don't get any side effects from the mushrooms. Where you get side effects is when they take this natural compound and they throw a molecular twist on it so that they can patent it. You see, nature always gives us the least toxic form of a molecule. Has to be because it's in a living organism. But in order to patent it, they have to, put a methyl group here or an oxygen group there, do some kind of a little bit of a chemical manipulation so that it can now be patented. And it's modifying that natural molecule that results in the side effects.
Right. Yeah. So eat more mushrooms. Here's a question: can you eat too many? And I'm going to say, can you get too many, I guess, of the medicinal mushrooms? So now that we know that they're micronized and they're, we're releasing all the actives. Would you say no? Okay.
No, you can't, because by far the most well understood bit of chemistry in the medicinal mushrooms are those polysaccharides, which are the immune modulators. And we can only absorb so much in a 24-hour period. And you can eat as much as you want, and anything that is not utilized by the body will just pass through unchanged.
So there's no toxicity, no concerns around.
None whatsoever has ever been noted. It's just like my old Italian grandmother said, you can't have too much garlic, Okay.
So we have another question. Is there a mushroom that helps repair myelin sheath?
Yeah, lion's mane.
Lion's mane is the same, exactly.
Lion's mane is exactly repairs myelin sheath.
That's yep. Okay, and kidney disease is another one looking for. Yeah.
Kidney disease is cordyceps.
Cordyceps again.
Yes.
It's really the powerhouse, isn't it?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
When first off, let's talk about organ transplants, kidney transplants, liver, whatever. The drug that allows organ transplants is a drug that's called cyclosporin A. Cyclosporin A comes from one place, and one place only. Comes from cordyceps. It is extracted and concentrated from cordyceps. But cyclosporin, while it is very effective as an anti-rejection drug, it also causes kidney damage.
Wow.
And so there's been quite a bit of research done using whole cordyceps along with cyclosporin. And what it does is you still get the benefit of the anti-rejection aspect of the cyclosporin, but it eliminates the kidney dysfunction that you get from the cyclosporin.
Okay, that's great information.
Hmm.
So I think I'd just like to touch base, if there's a minute, on the turkey tail.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that shines the most as far as
Anti-cancer. Anti-cancer.
Anti-cancer. Okay.
Anti-cancer, yeah. I mentioned the number 1 and number 2. Those drugs are called PSK and PSP, and those are both extracted from turkey tail.
Right.
Now, in cancer treatment, what's very common is either radiation, or more common is chemotherapy. Chemotherapy kills fast-growing cells. Fast-growing cells are cancer cells, but also stomach lining cells and immune cells, right? And when turkey tails, or the complete 360 is even better, when that is used in conjunction with chemotherapy, it opens a lot of options for the oncologist. Because the way they go about using chemotherapy is the oncologist will assess the patient and decide how far am I comfortable pushing this patient's immune system down before I have to stop the chemotherapy. And when turkey tails or the complete 360 is used in conjunction with chemotherapy, what we see is that the immune system does not crash as far or as fast, and it rebounds quicker. And this leaves options open for the oncologist in that they can bring in secondary chemotherapy drugs, or they can increase the dosage, or they can administer the chemotherapy drugs for a longer period of time before having to pause it. And all of those lead to a greater effect. So turkey tails is primarily used in cancer treatment.
So I remember reading the study on reishi functioning pretty much the same way, that they found that the results of combining it with conventional treatments, the chances were increased, your survival chances were increased substantially. I think it was almost 50% or something.
Yeah, substantially, exactly.
So, yeah. We have other questions coming through. There's someone here who has Hashimoto's. And she's saying that she heard that you shouldn't use iodine. And so, but she is using the 360 now. So, anything more to say to that?
That she should not use iodine?
Yeah, she was told not to use iodine.
I don't know who gave that advice or what the thinking was. I don't have that case in front of me, but that's contrary to what is usually recommended. Hashimoto is a hypothyroid disease where the body is, the thyroid is not producing as many thyroid hormones. So usually iodine is recommended for Hashimoto, but every patient is different, and I can't have an opinion on that because I don't know this case.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you. One more question. Someone is dealing with bone cancer, and they're wondering what you would have to say to that.
Complete 360.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, when
we have a almost identical formula to the complete 360, virtually the same, that is used in veterinary medicine. And bone cancer is very common in dogs. We actually ran a 1-year-long clinical trial on bone cancer in dogs at the largest veterinary cancer center in the U.S. And about 85% of the dogs were cured. I mean, they say remission, right? But to me, for a dog, it was 5 years out, it's cured, right? And so, because without that, bone cancer is fatal 100% of the time in dogs.
Exactly.
With an average survival of 188 days, and yet 5 years, with the complete 360. So bone cancer, complete 360.
Yeah, that combination.
Yeah, use that broad spectrum
Yes.
of immune response. Yeah.
So on that note, many people are probably not aware that Purica also has products for the veterinary and small animal sector. And so our immune pet is basically our human complete 360. So that is available in a powder form for your pets. So.
Well, for whatever reason, which I don't understand why, but for whatever reason, dogs respond better to mushroom therapy than any other animal that we've ever seen. Complete 360 for dog cancer is just is a miracle, you know.
I always say there's no placebo with animals. I think that's part of it. Which mushrooms would you recommend for detoxifying the liver?
The liver. Reishi is the one that's usually recommended for that. I think chaga also has quite a bit of research behind liver function, but reishi is quite commonly used for liver detoxifying.
Okay.
Stay away from alcohol.
Yeah, right. Don't have any fun.
Yeah. It's a solvent. Don't put it in your body.
Right. But, you know, the cholesterol one keeps coming up, and we're going to go back to cholesterol does, have to.
There's two things. There's two things for cholesterol. One of them is limiting the production of cholesterol in the body, and that's the oyster mushrooms. And the other one is eliminating the excess cholesterol that's present, either being produced by the body or coming in the diet, and that is shiitake.
Right.
Shiitake has a compound in it called aritidenine, which is very effective at eliminating excess cholesterol. Pass it through. So the combination of oysters and shiitake is very effective at bringing cholesterol levels down to the normal range.
Beautiful. Thank you. Another question, COPD, addressing that.
Cordyceps.
Okay.
Yeah, because cordyceps increases that oxygen. So let's talk about oxygen for a moment if we have time. The normal atmosphere is about 20% oxygen, a little less, but say 20%. And so right here in this room, as I'm breathing in, I'm breathing air in at 20% oxygen, and I'm breathing it out at about 13% oxygen. So that's the amount of oxygen the body is absorbing. After using cordyceps for as little as 2 weeks, what we find is that now you're breathing it in at 20% and you're breathing it out at 8%. So the body has much better oxygen utilization with cordyceps. Try cordyceps for a month. You'll know, you know.
I think I read somewhere the uptake is about 40% or something.
Yeah. So most people that take cordyceps for COPD will notice a very significant improvement within 30 days.
Okay.
I'd go so far as to say if you don't see an improvement in 30 days, probably not going to work, but most people do.
Enhance the athletic performance increase. There you go. Okay. So there's another question coming through. Is there a book that you would recommend, John, for anyone to read on medicinal mushrooms?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
There's a great one if you read German.
Oh.
Canadian author by the name of Robert Rogers. He wrote a book called The Fungal Pharmacy. And he just came out with another book. I don't remember the name right now. It just came out in the last month. But Robert Rogers, The Fungal Pharmacy, and his new book, I don't know, Fungal Pharmacy Revisited or something.
All right.
That's good. Also, there's an English author by the name of Martin Powell. Martin Powell has a book called, I don't know, something like Medicinal Mushrooms. But Martin Powell's book is really good. And there's another one too. I don't remember the name.
Okay.
There's a few good books on medicinal mushrooms these days.
So another question coming through. We're getting the green light here to keep going. So what is good for PTSD and adrenaline issues?
Psilocybin.
There you go.
And it's not legal everywhere yet, but it is legal in some places, and it's becoming legal more and more. PTSD has just shown just amazing results with very small doses of psilocybin, what is termed microdosing. And this is tomorrow's medicine. This is how PTSD and OCD and bipolar disorder and severe depression as well. Psilocybin.
Addiction falls into that list as well, doesn't it? Under that.
It's interesting because when we look at the molecular structure of psilocybin, it's almost identical to one of the main compounds found in cordyceps. Cordycepin and psilocybin are just slightly different molecules.
Interesting.
Now cordyceps doesn't seem to have really significant mental effects, although most people that take cordyceps do report that they have more clarity, is how they describe it. Okay. One lady told me that whenever she takes cordyceps, all of the lights turn green when she's driving. So, I don't know.
So, just from my own experience of mild PTSD, I found that lion's mane was really effective.
Probably would be, yeah.
Yeah. So that's just my own personal experience. Can you speak to Mycobacterium avium complex?
Mycobacterium as a family is very interesting because it's kind of like neither a fungus nor a bacteria. It has characteristics of both. I think probably cordyceps would be the most effective against Mycobacterium. Mycobacterium is what causes leprosy, tuberculosis, many of the very difficult to treat diseases, because Mycobacterium doesn't really respond very well to antibiotics, but it does respond better to antifungal drugs, which is basically cordyceps. Cordyceps has both aspects of antibiotic and antifungal.
It's interesting the confusion around that when people say, well, if you take a mushroom, they can't do mushrooms because they're fungus, but they're actually antifungal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of opinions out there, but like candida infections can be quite serious. And I've heard so many times, if you have candida, you can't eat mushrooms. Well, that's just crazy. The only treatment that's ever been found to be 100% effective against candida is something that's made from shiitake. So the idea that you can't eat mushrooms if you have a fungal infection just doesn't hold any water scientifically.
Okay. Yeah. And so the broad spectrum with the complete 360 is really beautiful because you're targeting, like you say, you're coming at it from so many different angles, so many different range of compounds.
If we look at the biological history of mushrooms, mushrooms live in probably one of the most competitive environments on Earth. You know, it's right there with the bacteria and the molds and the yeasts, and some of them grow in cow manure. Imagine what a competitive environment that is. And nature has evolved different ways for each organism to kind of give itself an advantage in the food chain, let's say. The advantage that bacteria have is they reproduce very quickly and they overwhelm their food source. But the mushrooms don't grow as fast. And so the mechanism that mushrooms have evolved is they exude into the environment compounds to stun or kill bacteria and other fungus to keep it away from its food source. And so virtually any of these biologically active compounds are effective across different species lines. You can take penicillin as an example. You can give it to a human or a dog or a horse or a cat. The mechanism is the same. It works, right? And it's exactly the same with these broad spectrum antifungal compounds, which are produced by mushrooms. Cordyceps grows in a very competitive environment, in the soil, in the insect, you know, And so it's not effective against this fungus or this bacteria or that bacteria, but it's a broad spectrum of activity. And that's effective in the human as well as in the insect.
Would you say also, John, just quickly, that the oxygen uptake, like the improved oxygen uptake from Cordyceps, also targets a lot of this, like bacteria and different things? Did you hear that things cannot grow in an oxygenated system? Would that be a factor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We do have a couple other questions coming through, but I think we've been given our red light. So we're going to have to just thank you very much for the information that you've shared so far. And I'm sure we would just love to stay on longer if we had the time to do that.
What I would recommend is all you folks that have more questions, send them in to Purica and I'll take a look at them and I'll answer you back.
Thank you. Good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you.
I'm sure that people will come up with more questions over the next half hour. Yeah.
So just message, you can message me at brenda@purica.com and I can pass those along. That works as well. Yeah.
And I'll be glad to answer.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you again, John. Nice to see you. Thank you everyone for being here this evening and for showing up. This has been great.
Thanks, everyone. Take your mushrooms.
All the best in Bangladesh. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye now.